Good morning and welcome to the Level Set. I'm here with Larry Fields and Mike Jones to talk about current events and relevant issues affecting us. And we want to dive right into one that's critical. Larry, you were talking before the show about something that affects us, affects our families, our daughters, our wives, everyone. And that is this Roe v. Wade decision that has been rendered by the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court who's controlling votes were all appointed by men that didn't win the popular vote. So they represent a minority view, a minority point of view in the United States. But their decision effectively, as you stated, Mike, takes away the agency of individuals all over this country, the autonomy of individuals all over this country. You have a government dictating to you what you will and won't do with your own body. That's problematic. And going forward, I know that there have been some discussions with this administration about potential codification of Roe v. Wade. I don't know that they are even in a position to really do that. They, again, are in a position to have to call for the base to come out and vote like never before to try to give them some controlling majority, at the federal level to do something. But going forward, man, what do you all see on the horizon relative to what this portends, the trends, the direction of the country, and what may be some of the potential outcomes?
Really, I have actually been thinking about it literally in those terms like you just framed it. And I think we're in a unique and I don't want to say place we've never been before as a country, as society, but I think we don't know what we're looking at. We know what we we don't know what we see. We know what we're looking at, but we don't know what we're seeing. And I looked up a couple of days ago, 2 death throes and birth pangs. And both in the human experience, dying and birth are probably the 2 most traumatic events in a life. Babies don't remember being born. We don't remember being born, and nobody can tell you what dying is because we don't come back to talk about it. So they're unknown. And there's some people that die easy, and you can watch some people at the end of life have really what you can describe as a tough time leaving. And I don't know, when I look at this moment that we're in, I don't know if we're looking at the death throes of an America that has run its course, or the birth pangs of a new America trying to be born. Because it could be some of both. Okay. And one of the things that and Americans are uniquely seem to be obsessed with this is the inability to accept endings. Okay, that if you think of societies as living organisms, as a metaphor, all living organisms have a life cycle. They're born, they grow, they mature, and then they leave. Okay, and the United States, just and I want to talk about America 1619, but you could throw in that more point. If you take Athenian democracy, which is a lot like American democracy, it wasn't really that damn democratic, but let's call it that. That's about 400 years. The Roman Republic, the former Roman Republic based in Rome, was about 400 years. if you took the Roman experience before the empire lasted about 400 years. The Republic, before it became an empire, lasted about 400 years. The English hegemony 300 years ago, that was about a 250-year, 300-year run. If you think about Elizabeth's reign to the Victorian era. So, with the exception of China, which is a society and a culture that in its present form, how we think of China, the place and the people, is like 3,000 years old and counting. Everybody else has kind of come in the West, has come and gone, and not so much so in the East. So one of the things you could, and I won't say argue, but this time suggests, if you think about 1619 to now, that's 400 years. If you think about the founding of the American Republic, that's about 250 years, right at 250. So we could be actually looking at something that's run its course and is now metaphorically died or struggling to become something else. Okay. And my problem is that we as Black people have now become so integrated ourselves into what is now this American experience. We lack the objectivity of a Douglass, a Du Bois, or Carter G. Woodson, or even the brother, critical race theory, my man.
Derek Bell.
Yeah, right. To step outside of the American experience as Black people and look at the American experience and analyze it from our perspective. I cannot think of a Black leader now who could do what Frederick Douglass did in 1852 and give a speech about the equivalent speech about what is the 4th of July to the slave. Or can you imagine a Black political leader, public leader, writing the equivalent of a letter from Birmingham jail?
I cannot.
I can't. I wouldn't even know who. So when we talk about this, it's our lack of imagination and historical perspective that limits, I think, our analysis. And I'm not talking about the three of us here this morning saying as Charles. I'm saying that collectively, our intellectual capital, I argue, as Black people, or is as depleted as American intellectual capital for the culture writ large. And so there's some stuff going on. Something happened. What's the song? Something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. What's that sound? Everything going around. So that's Stop Children, right? So that's the moment I think we're in, and we ought to try to frame it and think about it like that. So we'll consider all the possibilities and be ready for whatever history might bring us in this moment.
Right. And Larry, Mike raises such an interesting point. I want to come to you, Larry, with this, because I reflect on the question you posed at the top of that exposition, Mike. Are we in a moment of birth of something new, death of something old? I might argue that others have looked at it through that lens, others in power, and are currently and presently in an attempt to birth the old. They want to take what's happening now and force a birth, if you can go with that metaphor, since we're talking about Roe v. Wade forced a birth of everything that existed prior. Clarence Thomas's opinion at the end of Roe v. Wade, he listed out some other things that he wants to now have the court take a look at, and it all goes to reversal of the marginal advances that have been made over the course of our history through the civil rights movement and other efforts. Walk all of that all the way back. And I think that when you look at the broader efforts that are concerted, not just with the Supreme Court and the judiciary, but legislatively, the right extreme media, the militia that supports them on the ground through intimidation and threats, they really are actively involved in trying to walk the country in a very specific direction. And like you said, the lack of awareness on our part is going to be an advantage for them going forward. If we don't wake some folks up, man, it's got to happen. And Larry, I wanted your thought on what Mike said as far as are we witnessing a death of the social contract and organizational structure that existed in America? Or are we looking at the birth of something new that is inevitable in spite of what we see going on in the courts and in the legislatures around the country? Because the country is changing and its population is changing and its attitudes are changing. Which one do you see?
I think it's both. I think once again, Mike Jones has hit it out the park. It is absolutely a death of the notion that this is some sort of fair democracy, because it's never been fair, if you ask us. But I think that notion and the veneer of such, the veneer of such is being ripped off. If you look at all of the active and currently passed edicts of legislation that take away your vote, your ability to vote, your ability for representation. And even in the event that if in fact the outcome of an election is decided by the voters, if we, the powerful minority, don't like it, and I'm going to call these individuals that are passing these laws, if we don't like the outcome of the election, we can go ahead and change it. That is something that they have pretended has never happened before. So this is a new edict, and I do believe that there is a ongoing attempt at this point to change America to a country ruled RULED by an evangelical mindset. That is the most organized, well, one of the most organized groups in the country. And they are, they have the Supreme Court at this point, and they are continuing to force their will on individuals. And their will is based on a lie. It's not even biblically based. You can transpose evangelical for white because, they're not even biblically correct. I mean, they're those, so there is, I think, we've reached a point where, almost the Jim Brown moment, where Jim Brown's telling you, I'm going through that hole right there. Everybody in the stadium know I'm about to get the ball. I'm going through that hole right there, and nobody's going to be able to do anything about it. And that's what you have these conservative white folks doing, and those that love their masters, like Clarence Thomas.
Right.
And there is absolutely no shame whatsoever, and no sanctuary. I mean, you can't think of anything that they will not do. So there is something, that's what they want to create, and they have quietly they've begun that. I would imagine back when Mitch McConnell and those guys set out with the Federalist Society to take over the courts, and they envisioned a world that they can see now. I do not give them credit enough to see the change in demographics. I believe that this was just a plot from them from the beginning.
Yeah, and you've emphasized that over a period of time, Larry, and every time I hear it, it's more true. That this is all the result of not a overnight plan, not a 3-month plan. This was a 50-year plan, as you've pointed out. And it has to do with the tremendously organized effort sustained over that kind of time that now puts them in a position to really dictate the direction of the country. You mentioned Clarence Thomas, man. Let's talk about him for a minute. In my estimate, one of the most self-hating individuals I've ever seen, in a position of authority and power, doing almost irreparable damage to Black communities and poor communities, and seemingly with glee. This brother seems to delight in what he can inflict on behalf of whoever he serves, on the least of us. And it's really, sad to watch his performance, man. And there's a petition out there right now that has over 1 million signatures. Over 1 million people have signed on to essentially what is a recall. Supreme Court judges can be impeached, although we've seen that in this quote unquote democracy, even those who are Democratic leaning are loath to use the mechanisms of power to ensure that we do have something like a democracy, and not, a minority rule of radical, right-leaning, self-hating individuals like Clarence Thomas in a position to, dictate the direction of the country. What are some of your thoughts, man, as an attorney, Larry, on him as a jurist and just his evolution or devolution, if you will?
I think he's beyond problematic. I think that the fact that you overturn, and he does with glee when it suits his master, it suits the individuals that he's kowtowing to. It's criminal to overturn precedents the way he did. And they've got the math now, and you are going to watch a self-loathing individual roll back any rights that you potentially can have. That man would, we've never seen anything like him, ever. And he is not he's, if you read his opinions, they don't strike you as scholarly. I don't care where he gets his clerks from. This is a man that sat on the bench for decades before he would even mumble or utter a word from the bench.
Right. What was that? What the hell was that?
It's just baffling, because the only thing I can say is that the only thing I can gather is that he was going to be given his marching orders at the summation by someone else, but he never had a word to say. And this is just a loathsome individual. I just can't overemphasize how dangerous he is and the impact that he has had against things that are just. He just refuses to stand up for anything that is of use. He may stand up for gun rights when it's going to be detrimental to our community. But this is this is deplorable, and it's contrary to they want to try and act as if they're remaining true to a document that was that's 400 400 years old, and which is stupid. That makes absolutely no sense. There are things that we don't even operate the same as we did 10 years ago. So why in the world would you hold to or try and be a textualist? That's what he calls himself, a textualist.
Right. Meaning
that he adheres to the Constitution, to something that's been outdated for when it was written, it was outdated because things would change.
Right, Mike. I think Mike pointed out on the other show where we are the only Western democracy, such as it is, that still adheres to its original document without significant change. Yeah, there was a few amendments, but substantively, it remains largely intact as envisioned by the original slaveholders and human rights violators that put it together.
Yeah, the other thing I wanna throw out a different perspective. I agree with Larry about everything he said about who Clarence Thomas is as an individual. But I want to suggest something for a moment about what he represents in this moment. That's how I want to say it. I'm gonna throw out a name, Rene Girard. He's a French historian, dead now. But he came up with some, and he's a polymath, which is a term for somebody that is absolutely brilliant about a whole lot of stuff. And one of the things he was also what they call an anthropological philosopher. Okay. And in terms of how humans come to be humans, how we function, he was interested in that, and he came up with the theory of scapegoating, that in every society, there's others, there's minorities, and those minorities
have to be the scapegoats in order for the majority.
Yeah, the social cohesion of the majority requires, in times of tension, to somebody to blame it on. You execute the king or you execute the minorities or whoever it is. It releases the tension. Don't solve the problem, just releases the tension, and the cohesion comes back to the majority. To me, the rallying to do something about Clarence Thomas is he is now the scapegoat. So he's playing a role that Black people have played in America since we've been here. Because the reality is this push against Clarence Thomas, and he deserves the whipping he's getting. So I'm not talking about that. I'm not defending him. But this is the inability of white women to face their responsibility for their situation. 54% of white women voted for Hillary Clinton. Voted for Donald Trump. The majority of white people voted for Donald Trump. The majority of white people have voted for the Republican candidate for president since 1968, since Richard Nixon. Lyndon Johnson is the last Democrat to win a majority of the white vote. Okay, and he did civil rights, immigration, and everything, fair housing, and white folks ain't voted Democratic since, okay, including white women. So white women have been complicit in their own demise to preserve their white privilege, okay? And so now that they're in this space, somebody else has got to be responsible. So the brother that don't nobody like, that's drag him out, and we don't like him either. So them jumping on him ain't gonna make none of us upset. So Clarence Thomas allows you to vent the anger without dealing with the source of the problem. So I would argue that we need a deeper dive, and ultimately, and I said it in 2018, and for the 2018, and then the 2020 election. It'll ultimately, and I think the majority of white women still voted for Trump this time. So if you just think about it, their inability to decide, are they women who are white, or are they white who happen to be women, and where they're vested in, because there's not enough white men to maintain this patina of democracy and white privilege at the same time. They can only do it with the complicity of white women, and white white women. Okay, if you think it's all the else's. And
Mike, Mike, you're breaking up just a little bit.
we yeah, and
Mike, I think we're losing you a little bit. You're breaking up. I'm going to come back to you.
Let me touch on that. I want
Go
to
ahead.
touch on that. Yeah, Mike's going to have to. It looks like he's logging back on. But I wanted to touch on that. I think that Mike is spot on with respect to that, but I can't defend Clarence Thomas no matter what. There's just absolutely nothing. You mean scapegoat or not? I think I think the difference, Mike, in the scapegoating example that you gave and Clarence Thomas is that those minority groups that traditionally have been scapegoats have not deserved it. They have not deserved, and it was a fiction. And at the same time, two things can be true.
right.
I have since 1912, when the white feminists betrayed Mary McLeod Bethune, I have not trusted white women as voters or anything else as a whole. So we've known that white women's interest was always aligned with white males until white women were upset with the share that they received. That's their that is their only, typically, for the majority of them. I'm not talking about all of them, but for the majority of them, their major dilemma is the share that they're getting from white men when the patriarchy becomes too oppressive as it has now. In this case, and you're 100% right, because these picks wouldn't be on the Supreme Court if you didn't hear the mantra from the white women wearing the vagina hats, saying, they wore the vagina hats after the election, but they all said they couldn't hold their nose and vote for Hillary Clinton. So yeah, you're spot on once again. Hopefully we can, get Mike back on so he can finish his thought now.
Yeah, and while we're waiting on him to get back, let me expand this. But Mike, let me expand the discussion just a little bit, and you can finish your point. But there's something else going on with Clarence Thomas, man, because the January 6th committee, his wife, Jenny Thomas, it's been disclosed, was an operative, a straight up operative, man, in the attempt to overthrow the government and undo a democratic election in which all people who wanted to participated. She was heavily involved, man, throughout the process. She is the wife of Clarence Thomas, a sitting Supreme Court justice who himself has operated in such a way as to obstruct further inquiry into what his wife's involvement is. It's an untenable situation in a just society where the mechanisms of power function to maintain order. He couldn't be sitting his ass over there comfortably right now. He shouldn't. So I think that is part of the reason that he's been targeted. And to your point, Mike, is very, like Larry said, two things can be true.
Right.
Historically accurate, we always misdirect onto the black dude to avoid talking about what the real issue is. That's not new. But I think that is an interesting aspect, and it just goes to what in the hell is happening with Clarence Thomas and his motivation. What is his psyche? What are you doing, brother? When your wife is trying to help put people in power who are going to stomp on our ass every chance they get.
We've had this conversation before, and it's like I said, it's why I haven't written anything in 8 or 9 months, because I've already written something about whatever it is I thought I needed to say now. But I wrote a piece 3 or 4 years ago, whenever it was, that there are two, archetypes or things that exist that represent a way to think about large categories of the types of people or something that's in a society or a culture. And our history, there's always been two archetypes, and we just always forget that. And Django is the perfect movie for that. They're both Django and Stephen exist in our historical experience. We've always produced both of them. Naturally, there are those of us who rally, and the myth of Django is the one we identify with, just like in Black Panther. Shit, that's us. Okay, yeah, look at that. We dismiss Stephen as an apparition or an anomaly, and he ain't. Okay,
Unfortunately.
all oppressed people are oppressed based on the fact that the oppressor always has the support and help of some group within the oppressed group to maintain that oppression. So if you and Django is a perfect movie in this regard. When Jamie Foxx and the German cat came to the plantation with a boy and conned him into letting, they didn't break Django's wife out. They hustled him. They ran a con. Okay, he didn't know it. He didn't see it coming. They leaving in the morning. Okay, Samuel L. Jackson say, "Hey man, they running the game on you. Here's what this play is." Leonardo DiCaprio say, "Oh my God, I didn't see that." So Samuel L. Jackson's character, Stephen, he ain't had to tell nothing. DiCaprio wasn't even here. They wouldn't have never come back, and he'd have been wondering what happened. So if Samuel L. Jackson didn't even have to do anything to help them. All he had to do is just don't say nothing. But for whatever reason, inside of that oppressed DNA, he has a need to maintain the order that oppresses him. Okay, now I don't know why that is. People like Fanon.
Man, somebody who could answer that question could make $1 trillion, man. That has puzzled me for years.
What I'm saying is, we have to quit looking at that as some kind of anomaly or apparition, and look at it as part of not just our experience, the human experience. I mean, you can go in any society and any place where you find the majority and the other, inside the other will be people who are complicit. Wait a minute, I'll give you a modern 20th century thing. World War II, the Nazis invade France, they take it over. But the reason they didn't have to burn France down is the Vichy government was formed, okay? That's what they call it, the Vichy France. And they basically did a deal with the Nazis and said, we'll run France, take us out the war. Now the French underground, de Gaulle and Camus and all of them, they kept fighting and stuff, and the war went on, and the French underground was critical to the American effort when they invaded Europe. But the reality is the French were complicit in their occupation. Not all the French, but a minority of the French were willing to participate with the Nazis in the occupation of France. So it happens all the time. We got to quit thinking of human beings as some kind of exceptional species that is capable of these great things, which they are sometimes, but humans consistently live down to their worst instincts. I mean, if you took the history of the species on the planet, for every extraordinary achievement, you got 100 things that absolutely, matter of fact, Homo sapiens have been the most deadly species on the planet. Do you know how many species we've hunted to extinction?
Yeah.
I mean,
The
things that
vast
ain't
majority
here
of
no
them. The vast
more.
majority of them.
Yeah, the vast majority of things that are not here, whether they're plant life or animal life, yeah, were hunted to extinction. Okay, they didn't just
If you couldn't
disappear.
domesticate them, you hunted
Right.
them to extinction.
Right, exactly. So that's who we are as a species. Okay, so we need to quit thinking about us as some kind of inspired, aspirational being. We're fairly primitive, and given an opportunity, we will lower ourselves to our worst instincts probably 5 times more often than we rise to our best instincts. So
Like
with the
along
progress
those
we made in
lines.
spite of ourselves.
Right. Along those lines, I want to go back to an earlier point that you made in dealing with this whole system with respect to the question you asked earlier was what Black leader would write what Frederick Douglass did, or with respect to what is the 4th of July to the slave, or the letter from the Birmingham jail. I think with all of the technology and electronic advances that we have today, I think the power structure has done a very good job of quelling those voices. I maintain that you read it, and Dr. Alexander, would write those things. You have the sophistication to write, but broadcasting those things is totally different now. I think society has done a much better job of curating those minds and endorsing those minds that had that similar mindset and giving just enough. So there's a safety valve, if you will, that releases the tension that were made in those time periods. And you curate those minds so those minds don't have that same sort of hunger and desperation. And what this power structure has been able to do is to get to those individuals that have cachet to our community or to those people. I'll give you a couple of examples. Colin Kaepernick had an incredible movement going. Incredible. Who killed that movement? It wasn't the commissioner of football. Jay-Z was as culpable as anyone else. I maintain had Jay-Z went to the streets and fought with the people, he would have owned the Black team in the NFL. But he took a few pieces of silver. He was able to be co-opted in that instance. He didn't have to be a full-time Steve. He was a part-time Steve and co-opted in that instance. And the status quo reigned as the status quo did. I'll give you another example. People are not going to like this. The NBA was about to do something extremely radical when they were in that bubble. They were about to make an Oscar Robertson type move. Who did the NBA go to get to quell that movement?
Barack Obama.
Barack Obama. So he's not, now I would be out of order if I called him Steve, but he was Stephen-like in that moment. And just as you said, he told them, hey, look, this is what they do. He told the boss, look, this is what they doing. That girl know him. He know that girl. This ain't, just as Stephen is. But that is, so this interplay that we have, you're 100% right, but Stephen is dressed up now. And what they have done, in addition to that, is they disseminate the voices of a Dr. Jerome Moore, a Mike Jones, a Tyrone Howard, the Reddit Hudsons of the world. So it's as if you're in the woods,
And so, I mean, all of this is by design. So what my point is that, you know, guys like
Clarence Thomas that have a platform are, you know, exponentially
comparable to what they do.
because they know the game and they know exactly what they're doing and they know who they're speaking for. You know, you're right. That man has never had an original thought in his life
At all. I mean, that's a function.
I mean, if we want to blame someone, we need to blame Dan Forth. We need to blame Joe Biden, you know, and a number of these individuals that are responsible, because those are the people that put them in place to the dismay of Black women and Black men, but in the face of the oppression of Black women.
Yeah. And they know the outcomes they produce, people like Clarence Thomas. You know, and to your point, Mike, human beings, and it's been my, you know, growing experience to expect less, unfortunately, from human beings, man. Over time, you get to understand we do always, as a species, fall to our lowest elements, man. And that is also what can be puzzling when you look at those professional analysts and you know, government officials who look at things going on around them and still wonder what the hell is happening. You know, what does it mean? What does it mean when they say they're going to raid the Capitol and shut shit down? What does that mean? Well, it means what they said, man. You overanalyze. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Here's what, and I've wrestled with this particular issue. I can't decide if Black political pundits in television, because television is a terrible media, because you have to interact with a book. You don't have to interact with TV. So it's a passive informer. And I can't decide, or Black political pundits literally that ignorant in terms of being informed and be able to speak about these issues from a more sophisticated and complex and nuanced way. Or are they just on the payroll and that ain't in the script? Okay, because it's probably a little bit both. Because I'll take Larry's Morehouse compatriot, brother from Princeton.
Eddie Glaude.
Eddie Glaude. I know he knows who Rene Girard is. He's too literate, too informed not to. And every now and then he drops something, sneaks something in. But if you think about it, everybody who speaks is always speaking to the legitimacy of the status quo, not the legitimacy of the specific issue. They can be against the specific issue, but they can't call into question the status quo, the structural nature of what exists. Now again, I give that brother credit, and the brother from Baltimore who teaches at Morgan State, Johnson, every now and then, and the brother Ely Gazelle, whatever his name, with the wild gray afro.
Ely missed out.
Every now and then their emotions get the best of them, and they'll go off script. And they even let that happen because it helps validate the show. Okay, but if you think about the people who are on regularly, they are all critiquing whatever the problem is as the problem, not as a symptom of a larger problem or disease. So it's like going to the doctor, and the doctor says, "What's wrong? How you feeling? What's wrong?" You tell the doctor what's wrong, but a good doctor, a real diagnostic would say, "What's wrong with you? What you're complaining about is just a symptom of something else. And I'm asking you about this symptom to get to the nature of your problem." And that's how we ought to be thinking and approaching the, and I can't believe that these people ain't that smart. I can't believe that they're more literate than me, because I'm not that literate. I'm a barbershop staff.
Let's not tell that lie, Mike. We're not gonna let you tell that lie.
Okay, but like that, by the standards that I consider, you put it like this, I'm a street philosopher. Okay, I'm talking about first rate people who can spend time thinking and dissecting ideas to then talk about them later. I'm literate enough to know what everybody's talking about and what they ought to be talking about. But what I'm saying is, so it's hard for me to imagine they don't know better, but they've allowed themselves to be in a space where they can't do better. Okay, right. And we don't create any other mechanisms, because there was a time brothers like that could not be in those white spaces, so they were out here with us, and we got to be the beneficiaries of their superior intellect and information. Now that they did, as you say, Larry, now that they've been curated and co-opted into the system, they are no longer, their truths are no longer available to us. And I think that's really what I was referring to when I said, name me brother that could write the letter from the Birmingham jail now or give Frederick Douglass a speech. Not that they don't have the talent, the wherewithal, they just no longer exist in the space where they can speak truth to power in that way.
Yeah.
I think the folks that would be able to meet your criteria are not given access to those spaces, and we would not know them, because we're still identifying individuals that are brilliant that we don't know to this day. I mean, so, that have done work in separate parts of the country or separate parts of the world. But these curated individuals are given, access, cachet. And the thing about it is they don't have to be full-time students. They don't, so we'll take your example, Mike. And say Eddie Glide, I can remember when he was at Morehouse, he started his own fraternity when he was at Morehouse. That's how radical he was. Really, it's called the K-Met Society. He didn't feel the love and affection from the Omegas and the Alphas and the Kappas the way he wanted to. So instead of being suffering any potential rejection, he grabbed a bunch of guys that that felt the same way that he did, without the gravitas towards some of the major organizations. Started this whole new fraternity. Now, since he's been accepted, guys from Morehouse have been extremely critical of some of the things that he's done. Number one, during the Donald Trump Hillary Clinton election, he actively went out and told people not to vote. And we were extremely critical of him, of that issue.
Did he offer up a rationale for that? What was the hell was he thinking?
He talked about the crime bill that Bill wrote, and that sort of stupidity. But since he's been curated, told him, they own him, and in spaces, he's able to go back and have influence in those spaces just enough to continue to be a safety valve for any sort of movement. So if there's a movement going on in Birmingham, a radical movement in Alabama, they can send him in now and say, hey, look, you like Booker T, you boys need to cash your buckets where you are. That's what this society has done. And that's what they turned him into. And the individuals that'll be on the forefront, you saw an example of that during the uprising in Ferguson. You saw a real good example of that, because the traditional individuals that have been curated came and got turned around.
Mhm.
They were turned around in many instances.
Leonard, you saw individuals that.
I did. I saw some of our more established voices just flat out rejected by the young people who were on the streets in Ferguson, some of whom were brilliant in their own right.
That's what I'm
I've referenced Tory Russell before, Ashley Yates before, and many other, Tefbo, many others who just would not accept a curated approach, a traditional approach based in what you described, Mike, as an acceptance of the larger premise that the status quo is fine. This particular issue is the problem. They looked at it through the other lens and were absolutely opposed to anyone like that representing them, speaking for them, or giving voice to any issue that they felt more qualified to express.
And I think that's where we are to a certain degree. But the status quo continues to turn things out, and they control, broadcasting and so forth.
Yeah, and the beauty of our opportunity here is that we have our own.
And they don't have to do anything radical.
They make one change.
Mhm.
They'll take a true story and make one change to, in an incredible story to preserve the status quo. That's what they do. I mean, they just want to move you enough to maintain their dominance, and that's all. So, I mean, this,
It's a, we talked earlier about what's going on.
is this something old or new? Are we watching the death or the birth of something?
I think that's a very interesting question.
It really is. It really is, man.
You know what, Larry, as you were talking about, I was thinking that the real thought occurred to me, rather, that the real issue in America among white ruling elites is probably a conflict that was going on in Rome at the end of the more established Rome-based Roman Empire. And that is what constitutes the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire lasted another 600 years at Constantinople, because it morphed into a multi-ethnic empire. And anybody could be Roman if you supported the Roman. So Roman Empire was in Spain, it was in France, and all you had to do is swear allegiance to the empire. A lot the way the British maintained their hegemony from a little island, big ass navy, but a little island, not a whole lot of people. They allowed everybody to join the empire. Okay, you pay your dues, swear allegiance. You're now in the British Empire. You're now Roman. Okay, and Roman emperors started to come from a whole lot of places, as long as you're maintaining the empire. Barack Obama is an example of the expansion of the empire. Okay, yeah, he can be the emperor. We don't care what he looks like, as long as he maintains the empire. And I'm sure that there was a hardcore element in Rome that said, no, in order for you to run the Roman Empire, in order to this, that you have to be Roman. And the other folks were saying, it ain't enough of us to maintain the empire. So unless we bring other people into the empire, won't be one. And if we can run it like you want to run it, we'll be out of business. So the whole point is the empire, not this little notion of our ethnicity that we use to rally people to get to this point. The question is, how do we stay here now that we're here? And guess what? And I said this, a couple weeks ago. Jay-Z ain't one of us. Jay-Z is one of them. You can't be a billionaire and be one of us. So if he got to choose between where he is now and where we are, and I ain't saying he ain't gonna want to throw us out. I ain't gonna say he ain't gonna implore the empire to do it, but fundamentally, nobody who ascends to that level is going to put that at risk on behalf of the masses. The one thing we know about Moses for sure is he was raised by Pharaoh. Now we know that. Now, that's a historical fact.
And he was black.
Huh?
And he was black.
But and the point is, had he not gotten thrown out, okay, had his brother not exited, had the people that the brother that he was raised with had not exercised him, he might not ever have been leading any Hebrew slaves.
That's right.
Okay, so he ended up over there because he didn't have nowhere else to go. And being the natural leader that he was, he organized the people rallied for him. And next thing you know, we got Genesis. But the reality is, I don't believe he voluntarily left Pharaoh's house. Okay, that he probably was put out, and the rest is history, so to speak. So we are looking for leadership, and I would say these, and I'll take LeBron as a classic example. Here's a brother that his mother ought to be extraordinarily proud of him, because for him to come from where he is and be the young, relatively young man he is, I think it's really kind of extraordinary, because it'd been very easily for him to be messed up given his trajectory. But even in all the things that he's done, he has never used his platform or his wealth to challenge the system. He could have organized a black basketball and football pack. He said, there's enough of us. He said, we ain't talking about you small billionaire basketball players. Me, Russell, you, Kevin, KD, come on. We go put together $100 million. And we know some football players and baseball players that are come into. And matter of fact, we just gonna say, you got to do this because I know how much money you got. And now there's $100 million black political PAC that will fund black candidates who are putting in place the best program in politics for black people. You don't have to go to them to get the money. You can come to us to get the money. And we got extra money. We got more money than I know what to do with. I'm making cartoons now. And Mike, you got to throw in some to take your tennis shoes money and all of that. And you know Tiger real well. Go get his ass too. Everybody that made some money. And think about Aretha Franklin and Angela Davis. Mm-hmm. When Angela Davis got locked up and had this prohibitive bill, Aretha Franklin said, I'll pay a bill. And Aretha's rationale was, I make a lot of money and I'm who I am because black people buy my records. And she's out there on the front line for black people. I'm gonna take some of the money that black people give me and I'm gonna give it to that cause. Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, they being chased down the highway because they delivering the bill money for Dr. King. And they had to be driving through Mississippi or Alabama, wherever they was. LeBron and them could rent a jet to deliver it with security.
From their phone.
Huh?
They can send the money from their cell phone.
Yeah, I ain't even got to cut. Wait a minute. Harry and Sidney had to deliver the money themselves. They got from Marlon Brando and even a St. Charlton Heston at the time. LeBron and them got people. Okay, they can send their equivalent of Tom Hagen. Okay, and they wouldn't have to leave the house.
Right.
So, but my point is to your point, Larry, that the empire absorbs people. The empires that last because they move away from ethnicity and get into identity. And they'll allow anybody to be part of the empire as long as you support the empire. And when that happens, people move from their lower station to the higher station, independent of their ethnicity. Most people, a lot of people may have heard of the Medici, greatest banking family in the history of the world. The reason Western Italy had a renaissance, they paid for it. From the Sistine Chapel, all that stuff. They produced a couple of popes, and Louis XIV's mother was Catherine de Medici. Okay, so they was around a long time, but they were throughout Europe, and there were Black. At one point, the head of the Medici family was a Moor from Spain. Didn't make no difference. He was Medici. Okay, if you go to Saudi Arabia, now Americans don't show up, but a lot of them princes look like Larry. Okay, and I remember at one point in time, 20 years ago, the ambassador to the United States could have been Larry's brother, and he was a royal prince from the ruling family, from the House of Saud. So the real question is, for the American empire, will they be able to integrate it, or will they secularize it and move it away from some narrow-based theocratic vision of who it is? And now I don't know if it ever gets better for average people. So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the evolution or lack thereof of what we are currently living under. And I think that's anybody's guess. And given the level of ignorance and incompetence of the American political class, predominantly white American political class, I doubt if they'll make the transition.
I think
That's incredible, Mike Jones.
I think we need to focus our energy on what the new look of this country should look like for us, and how do we fashion that. I think we need to lay out a case for that, and I think we need to, I think our next few shows.
Yeah, I was going to say let's pick that up on the next show.
Some thread of that, because this thing is crumbling. Mike, you've already laid the case out for the fact that if it's not crumbling, it'll be crumbling soon. And so the issue is, what should it look like? I think our children are leading the way.
If we pay attention to our children. Now I have, it's no secret, I have 4 beautiful children and a beautiful wife. My children, what suited us, go to school, go to college, get a terminal degree. That doesn't suit them. They are rejecting this notion of education as it has been laid out. And even those that are matriculating, I'm talking about, our children and this isn't just me. I've got, I had dinner with friends who had 2 children at Harvard, one's at Yale, one's on their way to school. This is a Black family. And we're hearing they're having the same pains with this system. These folks, these children are just not going to adhere to the system the same way we did. They're demanding things different. In fact, they're calling into question the necessity for education, as Mike, you pointed out on the show before that these are vocational schools in many of these colleges now, and these kids are not tolerating that. So, those are some things that I think we need to take into account
and look at how this thing should shape out and what should be best for our community.
Yeah, that's a terrific segue to let the show wrap, Larry. I think that's the show we should pick up next week. Hopefully, we can be rejoined by Dr. Alexander. Gerald Christmas may be added to our panel as well. But that's certainly something we should cover, and I think it would lend itself to really another informative discussion for our viewers and listeners. I want to thank you all for joining us today, Larry.
Brother, I need to make one correction.
Thanks as always.
Go
ahead.
On the show last week, Mike Jones made the comment that my favorite Omega was Carter G. Woodson. Mike was, right on fine to Carter G. Woodson, but my favorite Omega, would have to be a tie between Mike Jones, Grover Johnson, and Reddy Hutchins. So I just wanted to make that note. Because I didn't like the way he was hard on himself, and I was so sad about that.
All right. Right on, brother. Well, we appreciate you, man. And you at the top of my list of alphas, man. So
Right.
Some of my best friends. Would you say some of your best friends are alphas?
Yeah, right. Hey, man, you brothers be peaceful, and viewers and listeners, please join us every week for this conversation, man. It's important, and we need you here. We need you out there doing the work that needs to be done. Thanks for joining us.